So what I shared with the panelists are two sets of questions, and I asked them to speak for about 2-3 minutes and to us 1 or 2 ideas, and we then open it to discussion with the audience to give you an opportunity, because in many sessions there were a lot of questions and very little time for people to speak. The questions are really broad, and we have 5 panelists who represent different groups. It's a very multi-sectoral roundtable. We have researchers and academics, we have policymakers, people who are involved with international organizations, civil society, practitioners. So I think this will be a very, very rich roundtable, and wanted also to give the audience opportunity to jump in. I don't really need to introduce those distinguished participants. I will say a few words. Most of you have already heard them speak earlier. So we have Dr. Ayun Badian, who's Senior Urban and Regional Planner with over 30 years of experience with both central, local, and international levels of government. Most recently, he's appointed Acting Director, Regional and Technical Cooperation Division, and he's the Director of Project Office in UN Habitat, and he's working directly as Senior Policy Advisor with the Executive Director. We also have Alain Payne, who is an architect and specialist in urban project planning. He also has 35 years of professional experience in developing countries implementing projects for community water supply, school, and the list goes on and on. He's worked in missions for the United Nations, European Union, the World Bank. He's the founding director of Development Workshop. He's also Canadian Honorary Consul to Angola. He's lectured in universities across the world. He has articles and papers published extensively. We also have Dr. Mahmoud Maseli, who is a professor of global ethics and international development at the School of International Development and Global Studies here at the University of Ottawa. He's also taught at Carleton and St. Paul universities. He's published books and articles in Farsi and English. He's a passionate advocate for dialogical ethics, recognition as justice and global justice, and he's also executive director and I think co-founder of Alternative Perspectives and Global Concerns. We also have Dr. Denise Pichet with us from the École d'Architecture Université Laval, Quebec. She's retired after 37 years as a professor, but she's still very much active, as you probably are aware. She's interested in domains of persons, environment, relationships, as well as urban planning and development. She is working as part of a multidisciplinary research project on living in the North with Indigenous people, as you're already probably aware. And she's involved in collaborative projects in Vietnam and in Senegal as well. And we have Dr. Jacques Genwell, who's here with us from Montreal Express this morning. He's Executive Vice President of the Association for Canadian Studies and the Canadian Institute for Identities and Migration. He doesn't need introduction in terms of all the work he's done in terms of immigration Quebec, ethnic minorities, official languages minorities in Canada. He's written extensively essays, books, journals, newspapers, and he's the author of many publications on government reports on issues of immigration, multiculturalism, and human rights. And last but not least, I'm very excited to introduce you Lorena Zarate, who is president of Habitat International Coalition. She has over a decade of close collaborations with the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing. So she has been working extensively on issues around security of tenure, land and housing rights right to the city worldwide. She's been involved in the elaboration and dissemination of the World Charter on the Right to the City and in the Mexico City Charter for the Right of the City. And recently she was awarded the John Bosefield Distinguished Visitorship from Geography and Urban Planning at the University of Toronto. So, there are 6 of you, so lots to say. We'll start with question 1, and I'm not sure in which order. Maybe we can start here, do it this way, and then if You can address either or both the questions, and we can do a second round if you want. You're given the time constraints, you will do one round and then open it to the floor. So, Monsieur.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Encore une fois, très heureux de partager ce panel avec vous tous. Vous le savez, les questions urbaines sont au centre de nos préoccupations de plus en plus. Nous sommes le mois d'octobre, comme je l'ai dit hier, c'est le mois que ONU Habitat a proposé aux Nations Unies pour que nous puissions faire des pensées, des réflexions dans ce sens et surtout travailler pour améliorer la compréhension de la question urbaine à travers le monde. Vous le savez, il y a 20 ans, environ moins un an, à Habitat, nous avions eu ce qu'on appelait l'agenda Habitat. Cet agenda Habitat-là avait pour objectif d'améliorer les conditions de vie des populations qui vivaient la plupart du temps dans des situations qui n'étaient pas acceptables du point de vue de l'habitat, mais aussi habitat pas seulement du shelter, mais de tout ce qui devait aller avec en termes de conditions de vie. C'est vrai que du point de vue de notre travail, nous avons beaucoup avancé. Nous avons fait qu'aujourd'hui, plus de 80% des pays à travers le monde ont ce qu'on peut appeler plus ou moins une politique d'habitat. Est-ce que c'est réalisé ou non? C'est une autre chose, mais nous avons beaucoup poussé sur le plan des politiques pour que les gens reconnaissent que l'habitat est un élément fondamental, non seulement de l'inclusion sociale, mais aussi de la reproduction et de la production économique. Et que c'était important de pouvoir y travailler, non pas dans le sens de ce que nous avons vu depuis 2008 avec la crise des subprimes, parce que l'habitat a été pris en otage par les développeurs. Au lieu de le mettre comme étant une condition de vie, d'ailleurs, vous le savez, des pays tels que les États-Unis n'acceptent pas ce qu'on appelle le housing right. Ça n'existe pas. À ce niveau-là, ils n'ont pas accepté à chaque fois que dans nos résolutions, nous parlons de droit au logement, ils disent non, il n'y a pas de droit au logement chez nous. Mais pour nous, fondamentalement, au niveau international, il y a droit au logement et que les populations ont droit à accéder à un logement décent et surtout à un logement abordable qui respecte les conditions humaines. Alors, nous avons fait des efforts depuis 20 ans, mais aujourd'hui, nous sommes face à une montagne encore beaucoup plus complexe vis-à-vis des questions que vous avez élaborées. Sur le plan économique, sur le plan urbain, sur le plan des inégalités et sur le plan des tensions sociales, nous visitons un terrain qui est extrêmement difficile. C'est-à-dire que nous allons vers Quito au mois d'octobre 2016, l'année prochaine, pour négocier un nouveau compact, le compact qu'on appelle l'agenda urbain, le New Urban Agenda, tel que l'appelle le Dr. Klaus, qui est notre directeur exécutif. Alors, ce nouveau agenda urbain doit s'articuler sur d'abord 3 piliers dont nous pensons qui sont des piliers normatifs. Le premier pilier est ce qu'on appelle le pilier de la législation et de la gouvernance. Les villes doivent être assises sur des normes légales et sur des normes de gouvernance acceptées par tous pour que nous puissions arriver à les gérer comme il faut. Le deuxième pilier qui est extrêmement important et que nous ne pourrons pas compromettre, que ce soit au nord et au sud, c'est planning, planning et planning. Pendant très longtemps, les gens ont voulu remettre de côté la question de la planification pour parler de la gestion. Urban planning versus urban management. Mais on ne peut pas les dissocier. Il faut d'abord planifier d'abord en fonction de ta croissance. Quand tu sais que ta ville croît à 2 ou 3%, pendant 10 ans, vous savez forcément, vous serez à une étape. Qu'est-ce qui vous empêche d'anticiper si vous en avez les moyens? J'ai même dit, faisons du barefoot planning. Faisons de telle sorte que nous puissions ouvrir les voies, même si on n'a pas les moyens de mettre les services de base, faisons de telle sorte que sur le plan foncier, et c'est là où encore le jeu est faussé, les gens ne veulent pas, parce qu'il y a des intérêts en jeu sur le domaine foncier. Mais planifier, planifier et planifier, c'est le deuxième pilier de notre approche des normes sur le plan fondamental. Et le troisième pilier, c'est la finance. Une ville, c'est d'abord fondamentalement de la finance. Il faut négocier les banques, il faut négocier les autorités pour mettre en place les infrastructures nécessaires que ça demande pour avoir une base nécessaire pour avancer. Et pour cela, les citoyens, si vous référez sur le premier pilier de la gouvernance, ont une très grande responsabilité. On ne peut plus aller vers le refus de l'imputabilité. Il faut que quelqu'un prenne charge de ses responsabilités. C'est le maire, c'est le conseil municipal, ce sont les responsables des agences urbaines qui travaillent avec lui au niveau de la ville, mais il faut qu'il y ait une gouvernance transparente et vertueuse. Il faut rendre compte par rapport à vos actions. Ce sont là les trois piliers que j'appelais le pilier de la droite. Le pilier de la gauche, c'est l'opérationnalisation de trois autres piliers qui sont extrêmement importants. Aujourd'hui, à cause de l'environnement qui se détériore, à cause d'une forte croissance démographique qu'on ne peut pas refuser, à cause d'une agglomération urbaine de plus en plus immense, vous avez vu le nombre de villes qui sont devenues millionnaires aujourd'hui, et même multimillionnaires, des villes qui ont dépassé la trentaine de millions, São Paulo, New Delhi, Tokyo. Est-ce que ce sont des espaces qu'on peut gérer comme des villes? Non, ce sont des méga-villes. Il faut imaginer une autre. Montréal a organisé il y a 2 semaines une rencontre sur ce qu'on appelle les aires métropolitaines. C'était la première rencontre d'une série qu'on devrait avoir. Donc aujourd'hui, il y a une question de revisiter l'agenda des aires urbaines et des aires métropolitaines. Mais dans ce domaine-là, il y a absolument une nécessité de revisiter la gouvernance et la gestion de ces grandes aires métropolitaines. Alors, dans ce domaine-là, nous voulons avancer pour qu'il y ait des possibilités de discussion logique par rapport à Habitat 3 et quels sont les éléments d'information que nous pouvons donner à ce niveau-là. Alors, il y a une nécessité absolue de visiter un deuxième paramètre après ce que j'appelle les risques. À la croisée de l'environnement et la croisée de la population croissante, il y a le risque aujourd'hui. Les villes sont assises sur des time bombs. Et la résilience fait que nous devons penser à comment faire de telle sorte que les villes soient préparées à ces risques-là. Que ce soit risque, on a parlé tout à l'heure des problèmes de sécurité, on a parlé des problèmes de terrorisme. Les villes sont très vulnérables de ce point de vue-là. Alors l'autre point qui est important est que sur le plan de la lutte contre la pauvreté et de l'exclusion, nous voulons pousser ce qu'on appelle les services de base. L'eau, l'assainissement, l'énergie, les transports, tous sont des éléments qui sont extrêmement importants pour qu'une ville fonctionne. Et si une ville ne dispose pas de cela, il y a tout un risque à ce que la ville ne soit pas optimale. N'oubliez pas, la ville est élément de production de richesse. Mais cette richesse-là doit être bien partagée et cette richesse-là aussi doit être durable pour pouvoir produire. Et le dernier élément, naturellement, qui est aujourd'hui le plus important, c'est la recherche de la connaissance. C'est les universités. C'est comment faire de telle sorte que la connaissance soit mise à la disposition des autorités. Je le dis, si dans le cadre nord-américain, il y a une pratique d'ensemble qui fait que les universités sont utilisées par les autorités politiques et les autorités sur le plan local, dans la plupart des pays du Sud, surtout en Afrique, il n'y a pas d'intégration entre ville et université. Les universités sont considérées comme des outcasts, comme on dit, et les politiques ne veulent pas du tout les entendre à cause de ce problème-là. La recherche fondamentale sur le plan de l'urbain doit aller dans un sens de bénéficier ces ensembles qui sont nécessairement complémentaires pour que nous puissions arriver à un développement durable. Je pourrais revenir sur des propositions de solutions par rapport à votre question. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Nous poursuivons, nous continuons.
Je vais parler en anglais parce que je pense que la plupart des personnes ici sont probablement comprendre l'anglais. So I'll do this in English. So I'm actually going to try to, answer both questions at the same time, partly because I got to leave soon. And I'll do this in 5 points. I'm of the opinion that with respect to, my personal experiences and work experience and so forth, that we're going to have to identify objectives for targeting and reducing vulnerability. So I think that, in Canada, I'm quite convinced, because I have the privilege of being able to access a lot of data sets that are generated by our governments, that we can identify reasonably quickly, and we know anyways instinctively what the sources of vulnerability are. And we speak to the issue sort of in very general terms by way of the need to combat vulnerability, but what we really need to do is, in various sectors of society, actually set concrete objectives with respect to vulnerability. Like, here's our objective, our target, or sort of a modern day program of affirmative action, but one that takes into account the changing demographics of our society and doesn't think about vulnerability as a one-size-fits-all approach. in terms of solutions. So that would be number one. Now, to get there, right? How do we get there, right? So for point number 3, that means we need to mandate our governments at all levels to set such objectives and work together to achieve them, right? So that the government and civil society sit together to work to establish what these objectives are, create a reasonable time frame for meeting these objectives, and not create unrealistic expectations either that they're going to be solved overnight or quickly, right? So, but we still need to have those goals established. I think that will be a very key contributor to reducing inequality and social tension. Not that it'll eliminate inequality and social tension. I don't think those things are easily eliminated. They're things we're going to debate constantly as we have, over decades and centuries. But we need to set concrete objectives and not simply, pay lip service to these things and recognize the problem and say we're going to deal with it, which our governments, many of them of goodwill, are attempting to deal with it, but without setting objectives. And I think those objectives need to be set. I think those objectives need to be extended to the corporate sector. We talk a lot about corporate social responsibility, but I think to really demonstrate corporate responsibility, the corporations have to be in line with those objectives. And so, again, it can't just be, we've got our person in charge of corporate responsibility here in our sector, in our department, whatever. They'll have to have some real objectives, and they'll have to be in line with government to the extent that, there might even be some compliance measures that government will want to identify for those corporations and seek to work with various branches of government to ensure that they are meeting they're working towards the same type of objectives. If we don't do that, I don't think we're going to make progress in that sector. Anyways, if the top 1% of on the income spectrum doesn't want to pay more tax, then the next best thing they can do is to ensure that their enterprises are being very good corporate citizens. And good corporate citizenship means having objectives to reduce vulnerability in society. So let me conclude on 2 quick points. This is going to come from projects that I've had the opportunity to work on. I'm currently working on. I got a really interesting project I'm working on with an employment agency in Montreal, a large employment agency, which is very interested in the issue of mentoring. Right. So what's the what are the opportunities? I'm doing a big survey on how many people have mentors, who their mentors are, how they met their mentors. If they don't have mentors, and they'd be interested in having a mentor, etc. In whatever environment they're in, whether it's place of work, university, or other sectors. Now this comes from the previous project I did about 10 years ago, where I asked sort of a follow-up. It's going to take 10 years, a long time. It's a follow-up on a project I did where I asked a group of I guess 300 people, not by my first attempt, I like to interview 3,000 people or do a survey, but 300 people, so something that's got more of almost a bit of a qualitative dimension to it. How do you find, what's the best way to find a job? Right? The best way to find a job, and they had 4 or 5 options. It was, you find a job by going on the web and, doing a search. You find a job by going to an employment agency, either a government employment agency or another type of employment agency. One other answer I don't remember. Or you get the best way to find a job is through family and friends. Right? 75% of my sample, disproportionately from various minority communities, said the best way to find a job was through their family and their friends. Right? So it's with contacts. But then when I asked them who their contacts were and what type of jobs they got, it was very often a replication of the type of network they had. Right? So if, for example, someone's cousin worked at a garage, they got a job at a garage. If their cousin worked at Walmart, they got a job at Walmart. Right? If their cousin worked for, some sort of highbrow, fancier place, whatever, they were able to get something better. So very often we have 2 minutes left. I want to. Very often we replicate those networks that we have, which can be a real problem in terms of meeting targets as regards vulnerability, because you could be sort of stuck in a particular place or strata or so forth if we can't break you out of that particular area. If your network isn't a strong network. Right? And there's a lot of research being done about this right now. So the whole issue of mentoring, I think, if we're going to take this on a micro level as opposed to a macro level, I know the speaker before me here spoke about the macro issues, which we definitely need to address. But on the very micro issue, on the sort of one-on-one, helping people one-on-one, which I believe in, actually, that we also need to think of this in terms of helping people one-on-one and helping people across isolation or exclusion or disengagement or disenfranchisement. Very often that's going to happen one-on-one, while the sort of collective or macro initiatives are put in place. We'll need to see how many people are willing to mentor across the spectrum. Across the spectrum. That will include, again, people in corporations, who we need to ensure that part of the corporate responsibility does involve this mentoring. And that doesn't just mean mentoring someone inside their corporation. It could mean mentoring someone outside their corporation who's in a situation of vulnerability. Thanks very much. Yeah, got it.
Okay, so now we'll hear from a civil society perspective.
This will be slowly because English is not my first language, so Hi everyone, buenos días. Thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation to join in this conversation. I'm sorry I couldn't attend yesterday's debate because I was in New York attending some other debates. Very similar debate actually inside the new school around the theme of the just city. And that's part of the urban thinkers campuses that are being organized all over the place as part of the Habitat 3 process. To have, especially engaging universities and local communities and some officials in this discussion of the city we need, the city we want for this new urban agenda. So, because of the work we are doing, Habitat International Coalition, I'm going to try to address both the global, the macro level, the international level, and also some more local level, meaning some cities in this case. Our members, around 350 organizations in around 120 countries at this point. I'm very happy to hear actually there's some colleagues here have been part of the organization and the debates inside the organization some decades ago. So our organization was more actually in Canada, in Vancouver, in '76, exactly at the moment of the first UN conference on human settlements. Since then, we have been around, which is a huge honor, of course, but also a huge responsibility. And especially now that we are facing not just the discussion of the new urban agenda, but also trying to address what happened in relation to the habitat agenda in particular, and also with the Vancouver Declaration. I invite you didn't read it yet, you read the Vancouver Declaration and you read the Istanbul Declaration at least. The Habitat Agenda is a very long document, but the Istanbul Declaration is a short document, and the Vancouver Declaration too. And they're very, very inspiring documents, very wise, and I think very actual, very, that we can apply the same analysis, the same diagnosis of problems in most cases, and the same proposals and solutions. If we look around, of course, and I mentioned that before, we don't think we're going in the right direction. The situations are worsening all over the place, and I'm going to focus now only on two of them. We can talk about many, many, many things, but homelessness and so-called informal settlements of precarious neighborhoods all over the world. As you know, this is growing both in the north and in the south. Homelessness, in particular, after the crisis, the 2008 crisis, as you know, was a financial crisis, but linked with the housing crisis and the speculation all over the place, pushing people into the street. So numbers are growing everywhere, especially in the north. Or especially in the north, we know because there are statistics and groups working on that, so we have more data. Everywhere, from New York to London, Canada, several countries in Europe, etc. Growing problem. Not to talk about, of course, now migration crisis and refugees, and that is in these days also adding to that account. But not only growing homelessness, but this is the part that is also worrisome for us, is the criminalization of the home. So the governments are not just not doing anything to prevent that and to solve that, but the trend is actually the contrary. So criminalization of not just homelessness, but people helping homeless people living in the street. So this is the trend, and I'm sure you know about that already. And this is the trend in the States, and this is in the United States at the local level. So cities are, changing laws to actually criminalize that. Also in Canada. Good news. I just heard about that a couple of days ago from our members in New York. Actually, they're from Washington. It's the National Legal Center on Homelessness and Poverty. They work on human rights at the legal level, both inside the United States and at the global level in Geneva. And although the fact that the United States has not, signed the human rights international covenants and all that, you can still apply human rights approach and legal standards inside the states, and they did. And they actually now have some decisions by the National Court to actually say to the local governments and local authorities, you cannot do that. You need to go back and to those to the previous situation, and of course end the criminalization. The so-called informal settlements, another huge issue, and this is mostly like a call for you being academics, for you being professionals, for you being also representatives of the United Nations, and in this case, UN Habitat. We have been a long conversation with them, during all these decades about the relevance of naming things in the good way. If we name the precarious city that is actually the city of the people, and it's the city of the people, especially in the Global South, we're talking about between 30% and 75% of the people living in so-called informal city. Well, that's the city of the people. And if we put that a negative name, so it's informal, it's marginal, then it's illegal. In several cases, it's illegal. And the way to solve that informal neighborhoods is actually through clearance and through evictions, which is, of course, not the solution, and it's against the international law, of course. So we need to be careful about how we frame and how we name the city of the people. For us, that's the city of the people, the city made by the people, that is an actor, a fundamental actor, the key actor in many cases to build the city. So we call that the social production of habitat, and the social production of the city, to recognize that as the way to do it, and to support it. So several examples how to support that, not to criminalize that, not to ignore that actually is not on the maps, it's not on the international statistics, etc., etc. So to recognize that and to understand those processes and to support those processes. And if you do that in Uruguay, in some cases in Buenos Aires, in some cases in Mexico, all over the place now in Central America, through co-ops, through different kind of associations, you provide adequate land, you provide adequate financial systems, and not only through banking systems, etc., and technical assistance. The results you can have are much better, much cheaper than the results that the private sector and the public sector are providing that are actually not reaching the people most in need. Finally, I have 30 seconds. So just to say, the agenda for us is a right to the city agenda, including all human rights at the city level, and we can discuss that more, including the social function of the land and of the city, so no speculation, no accumulation, redistribution of that in terms of the social need. In Mexico, we have 5 million empty houses. So we need a housing policy? Well, not really. I mean, we need a human rights and we need a housing rights policy to address that issue. We can't afford having and keep building houses all over the place, destroying the environment and not really dealing with the issues we need to deal. And here, finally, just as a provocation, we need to really think about this new agenda all over the world about the competitivity, about global cities and world-class cities and smart cities and all that, and think about if that is really, aligned and coherent with the just city and the right to the city and a city for all. Thank you.
Thanks for this opportunity. I'm Alan Kane, Director of Development Workshop for an NGO based in Angola. I wanted to address, basically, I'm going back to the initial question around identity-based challenges. And I think one of the, looking at this from an Africa-China perspective, I think one of the big challenges is migration to the city. I wanted to pick up on some ideas that Jack mentioned. This is largely migration out of poverty, looking for opportunities to survive. The key question there are basically two key challenges for migrants to the cities, and African cities are largely cities made up of migrants. And the big challenges are around survival, livelihoods, and a place to live. And as Jack mentioned, social capital is key. This is the key that new migrants use, through family connections, through ethnic connections, village connections, to try to access both employment or livelihoods opportunities and a place to live. And most often in African cities, these opportunities are provided in the informal markets. And again, as Jack talked about the Canadian experience, a new migrant, even using social capital connections, can fall into a poverty trap, or can actually, with good contacts and mentoring, can find opportunities to move out of poverty. But the big challenge, and the challenge picking up on what Lorena has introduced, concept of the right to the city, is that in the informal economy, where most migrants find both a place to live and a place to work, most cities do not offer protection. They do not offer the basic protection and rights that people need to protect what they can gain, or the housing and employment that they have found in the city. And I think the key to a right to the city is protection for those gains what the poor have achieved in moving out of poverty. The right to the city is a collective right, although, as Lorraine mentioned, it's also a human right. But community rights and human rights have somewhat different perspective. And there's been a lot of discussion about the right to the cities, that won't go into details on this. But the second question related to examples of good practice or successes. And I'm going to draw from a couple of examples from our work in Angola. Development Workshop is a founding member of Habitat International Coalition, and I'm really delighted to meet Lorena. She was, I think, elected just last week, or
re-elected.
Re-elected, yes, right. I think the one of the key lessons that we've developed in Angola is a concept of urban forums. Urban forums are spaces for civil society to engage with local government around issues about spaces to challenge government, to get access to government programs, to monitor progress against the government programs and the Millennium commitments, and also to be consulted. The forum model was borrowed from post-apartheid municipal elections in South Africa, where particularly in cities like Durban, forums were formed to fill that space before elected councils could represent communities. And we have that situation in Angola prior to municipal elections. First urban forums were created with the help of our organization and a number of others in 2001 in actually Quilamba, Iccasu, which is now one of the model cities in Angola, but have been replicated in most municipalities now across the country through government programs and civil society programs. And they're effective spaces in a pre-democratic or pre-local council election form. But if one looks at countries like Brazil, even with strong municipal democratic traditions, urban forums still have an important role for dialogue with local levels of government. And the second experience I wanted to mention was our engagement, along with some colleagues who are present here, in preparing the Habitat 3 national report, which basically is going back looking at the habitat agenda. And I agree with Lorena that probably since the publication of the Istanbul Habitat 2 agenda, society's struggle is to defend those positions that we're taking in the Habitat agenda. And this is an opportunity for at least those of us who are working, Engineer Adriano and several other colleagues have been working collectively with state and civil society actors in looking at the achievements and gaps that remain of using the Habitat agenda as the baseline. So a couple of examples.
Yes, good morning. My name is Mahmoud. I want to start from this short introduction that I come from Iran. I follow my own mystical, spiritual vision of who I am as a human being and what development means for me. I'm a Canadian too right now, Canadian citizen, inspired by Charles Taylor, written on dissertations, PhDs, all the things. I've worked in Africa. I have the experience of living in Latin America, so I know who I am. Just thinking about when we speak of development and the way who is talking about development on the behalf of who? Persian, Asian, Canadian, North American, Latin American, African. All these has brought me to this. I have to work on global development. So from this perspective, I'd like to only share with you 2 points. The first point is that we are in need of a precise definition of the terms that we use in our work. Let's say, for instance, instead of using poverty, I suggest that we are in need of using uneven development or inequality. Not to be confused, because poverty is kind of confusing conception. Uneven development and inequality, of course. I remember some of the ideas coming from the ethicists of international development. I'm one of them. I'm an ethicist, International Development Association. They believe that, okay, listen, when we think about the condition of life of different nations, for instance, African nations, for instance, we can argue that their own condition of life has been affected or been determined by inequality or uneven development, which is right. However, we should not disregard the fact that people in today's world are suffering from inequality and all these problems because of powerlessness and hopelessness. They do not have any hope on what to do for their future, and they have lost their power, and they believe that they have to submit their own will to the rest of the world. Having this understanding of the meaning of inequality and uneven development, I would like to say that the road toward the success of the nations must be, be open to the nations for themselves to, first of all, define who they are and what they need. It would be, I suggest, very simplistic to say that, okay, I'm very sorry, but from my heart, very sincere heart, to say that plan is the solution. We must leave it to the nations to decide how they want to develop themselves, because different nations, based on the historical condition, based on the identity specifications and so on, they should know how they want to develop themselves based on their own needs and requirements. That is one form of that. Second is that development is basically understood as the economic growth and planning for economic growth. I like it. It is a necessity, but it's not sufficient. As you had a conversation with gentleman, lovely conversation, that development must be understood as a kind of multidimensional development, because there are a number of different causes for inequality and uneven development. We are in need of thinking about social development, political development, cultural development, and what has become known in today's world in the literature of international development as human development. That means simply that the ultimate purpose of development is to enlarge people's choice, leave them to themselves to decide how they want to develop themselves. My concern is that today's view of planning for development is a kind of managerialist, interventionist view of development. So let us want to impose our own understanding of the life and development to the others. The third point, simply last sentence, is that we are often, how to say, ignorant of the structural causes of uneven development in today's world. Listen, the world has been structured around this system. The international system does not allow the nations to develop themselves. Give you one example, just one example, because we wanted to make one example there, something like that. Think about TRIPS. What is TRIPS? Trade-related aspects of trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. A convention signed and approved by WTO, World Trade Organization. 176 countries have signed that convention, and that convention is binding. It means that it's legally forceful somehow. TRIPS gives the opportunity to multinational corporations to extend monopoly or the markets, the international rights, for 50 years and sell their own products 400 times more than the cost of production. One example. South Africa, after apartheid, decided to buy anti-AIDS drugs from Argentina and from Brazil. Why? Because anti-AIDS drugs are produced by 39 American corporations, and the per capita price for affected person is $3.60. South Africa decided to buy the same drug from Argentinian corporations, and the per capita price was $1.50. South Africa could save per person $1 and almost on $2. Africa. Guess what happened? Multinational corporations, under the same severity of TRIPS, an international convention, came together. South Africa was banned. Al Gore, the vice president at the time of Clinton, initiated a global campaign against Africans, against South Africa, preventing them to decide about their own decision, what they want to do, how they can freely act in the international market, how they can express themselves the way that they want. How can we then think about development and look at the other nations and disregard the international structural systemic cause of underdevelopment into this world? As long as this international system exists, I'm sorry, I do not anymore. We have to move toward a certain kind of good understanding of the causes of underdevelopment and inequality in the world. So we have to modify our own vision of what the meaning of development is. At the same time, we have to draw on the structural causes. Thank you.
Okay, so poor Denise is coming last, but I'm sure she'll have.
But not least.
Not least.
Comme on dit en français, je vais dire des platitudes.
Des platitudes.
J'ai aucune idée comment on traduit ça en anglais.
Comment on dit ça, les platitudes?
Boring.
Boring things.
When I read Louisa's first question at 10 o'clock last night, I decided to write platitudes. So what I mean by that, I decided to say the first answer that came to my mind, and most probably it's the one I believe in firmly. So I'll read it to you and make a connection to what Maria and Alan said. First, I'm an idealist about cities. I firmly believe that urbanization is an enriching phenomenon that contributes to the reduction of inequalities, of most basic inequalities, not all basic, not all inequalities. Hope, for instance, I think, to take your word, is very important. I also think that social tensions are inevitable as a diversity of people come together, and that is a force of cities, not something that is an obstacle or something wrong. It's a positive force, but that these tensions they really enrich our society at the condition, though, if economic growth is not captured by the sole profit of capitalist accumulation. And this, I mean, we tend to not talk about it because we have no way of dealing with it, I think. Therefore, the main challenge to global urbanism for me is not related to identity tensions, as I said, because I think it sustains creativity, it sustains diversity, and it sustains constantly changing world, very dynamic worlds, and I think it's a really important force. It is more our own social and political incapacity in controlling the extreme accumulation of capital than I think it's the case now. That's why there are more people who are homeless while there are empty houses everywhere. And we also lack imagination in devising redistribution mechanism. I think that's the main problem of development. That would eliminate poverty and especially ensure rights, notably the right to the city. But I like the word that you use, the city of people. I've been looking for a word for that for a long time. I think the solution is there. It's in people who live and who have networks, who find jobs even in very, very difficult situations. And I also like these forums that you're talking about, which Dwellers International also uses a lot. I mean, it's people talking together, and that's why cities are so rich. And we have to encourage that because we haven't found a way of dealing with this extreme capitalist accumulation. So I said I would say that's Thank you.
Okay, so the organizers allowed us to stay until 12:15. I'm not sure if everyone is okay with that, but that gives us about 15 minutes for discussions, reactions, comments, questions from the audience. Feel free to just comment or direct questions to the speakers or throw ideas.
I do have a question.
Of course.
A direct question to all of you guys. I'm going to try to phrase it or to frame it from my own intellectual and I'm a professor of communication, so I'm always thinking about how can I use communication to solve some of the problems that you guys are facing. And I didn't see you or hear you trying to bring in the force of communication to solve some of these questions that you guys are asking. So I did, I'm going to try to read my question because it's very, very precise. Based on whatever you said and based on the question that was posed, what kind of new relation do you foresee, for example, when it comes to human relation to labor, to workplace? Because when we talk about migration, when we talk about human movement from slum to cities or to main city, beside this decentralization that Dr. Badin talked about yesterday, but what do you see else and how could communication, especially new technologies, because it's inescapable and irreversible, whether you like it or not, we will use them. And our kids will use them, and the kid of our kids will use those technologies. What can you do, or what do you foresee, and how can we use these to solve some of the questions that you guys are asking? Cities have no more land to build highways and streets, etc. So how can we use, again, different means of production to bring to the people who are marginalized, actually from the margins, these new ways of working and producing wealth for everybody? That's a very simple question. So I want to hear you guys from that.
Answer? Should we gather another 3 questions? Yeah? Anyone else with this burning comment question? Okay, I guess you can answer
So why don't you start? Well, I think we did talk around the issue of communication in the sense Jack raised it, and I think I talked a little bit about the importance of social capital networks, and those are based on communication. And social media enhances the power of social networks that urban migrants and poor use to access a place to live and a place to find employment or opportunities in the informal sector, where they and it enhances those opportunities. It could be used around in again, we're piloting some of this work around in municipal forums in trying to use social media actually to extend the forum from meetings to networks.
So, yes, thank you. Good question. I'm a stranger here because I'm different theoretical perspective. I agree, of course, information technology is inevitable. You have to use it. But it depends on the directionality of the use of information technology. Who's giving the direction? In today's world, why information is controlled, centralized and controlled by global capitals, information influence. How can we conceive and assume that poor people living, according to the gentleman, in the slum somewhere in the world, they can use technology for understanding of what they can do for themselves? One point. The second point is that I guess that information technology, at least the use of information technology, is something that is created. It is the usage of information technology or understanding of how we can use that for something, for some purpose, is not impartial because of the fact that in today's world, listen, global capitalism is manipulating the mind of people. Even in many of the cases, people have access to information technology to communicate, to know how to communicate, but they do not know how to use that for their own real problems. We have to answer these questions. What do we mean by information technology, communication, and in what direction? I suggest, as long as global capitalism is doing the business, and the business is business for profit making, I think that information technology and communication cannot help the nations.
Very pessimistic, you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much for indeed a very important question in relation to the new urban agenda. I don't know if you have heard about Les Indignados, which is a very strong movement that started some, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. It is linked to a very powerful concept of today's urban spaces that we call public space. And then you have heard about Tahrir Square in Egypt. You have heard about Wall Street movement. And all those that are indignados about the urban and the way it was been. They have always been using the new technology in approaching, in communicating. Even if some movement was trying to be blocked, the social media was a very important tool to get people together. It was working very well in the revolution in Egypt, and then it works. But beyond that, I think we would like to take the opportunities of this movement that we are trying to create through the Urban Thinkers Campus, like this one that you are having here. There are many others around the world now, and we are working towards making sure that the contribution of those that are even remote in rural places, whenever they can have access to power and then to a smartphone, that they can express their concern. I think today there is no doubt, even in the election of the United Nations, the next executive Secretary General of the United Nations, people are calling for a global word expression so that it will not be just the Security Council of the General Assembly that is electing the new Secretary General, which hopefully may be a woman, to be a global event. I think there is no way that today we can ignore the possibilities of the new technology and IT into moving things. Now, in terms of relation and working place, working space, for sure, urban today, through the whole movement of smart cities, is trying to build on the ability of the communication and new technology to advance a new way of relationship. Just to give you an example, I don't know if you have heard about the safety pin. The safety pin is an app that you can have over here that we are using right now in 3 cities around the world to test through the Cities Alliance that is supporting us in Delhi, in Nairobi, and in Bogota. And the safety pin is to try to set up through using the roads to check where are those black spots into a city where a young lady or young woman may have a problem of safety and security. And by using the apps, we are able to triangulate and to make a map that can be available to the decision makers and to know where should we put policies in order to avoid that, young men, young women, and girls are in trouble with regard to safety issues. We are developing, and in my office, I'm working with my colleague Juma Asiago, who is my lead in the Safer City program, to develop what we call the Safer City 2.0, which is the new generation of safer cities in terms of approach. Absolutely, today, the communication within the city management, within the city planning, with planning for decision making, with mapping, with everything, I think we have to use the new technology and then to communicate better in terms of decision making. There is no way that I'm sure at the time of Alain and myself, when we were doing this mapping, we were doing our map ourselves in order to make sure that we have access. But today, the possibilities of using new technology, Google technology, everything technology is here to allow us to improve our communication. It may be sometimes negative aspect. We should not play that. We should not avoid that. Sometimes people I was saying yesterday that 2 young men will be sitting over here, rather than communicating, they communicate with a smartphone. I think there is a downside of technology that we have also to see, but the positive side is much bigger, and we should use it to improve city management and to improve the quality of work of our planning of cities. Thank you.
I've worked in the School of Architecture, and information technologists are very prone to say that it will solve the problems of the world. But I still always remind them that we have physical needs, and that we will need streets. We will continue to need places where to meet. And so the technology cannot be information technology cannot be thought of as a replacement of something else. It's a tool that's adding to our conversation, that people use, that citizens use. But I believe that we in development studies, we must be extremely careful not to be too naive about the use of this technology. People are using it, and I think maybe that comes to the city of people. They have their own way of using it. But I'm sometimes afraid when I see, for instance, the World Bank just showing up this space of electronic banking that is saving Africa. What's behind that? I mean, people used to have ways of sharing things, sharing money. Now they're putting it in the bank through this electronic system that the World Bank likes so much. So I think it's a tool. It's very efficient. A lot of people use it, and it's good that people use it. But I think we must be careful not to be too naive about it. And it will certainly not replace the physical side of our work.
Thank you. On that note, it's 12:15, so a big round of applause for